With Austin Price, Brent Hubbs, VolQuest.com. Breaking news on Tennessee's campus as Tennessee, Austin, believe it or not, is looking for yet another strength coach. Their 10th in 13 years as Craig Fitzgerald bolts Tennessee, heads back to the NFL with the New York Giants. Your initial thoughts?
Shocked. I mean, Jeremy Pruitt stood up there and met with the media to kick off spring practice a week ago this past Tuesday and talked about, how Coach Fitzgerald was a hot commodity and how he had turned down another league school. And everybody knew he was talking about Alabama. So you dodge the bullet of Alabama, but you don't dodge the bullet of the NFL. And, sometimes we overstate how important, the strength coach is, probably a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think continuity, really is something that pays off. And I think that's a big reason why Scott Cochran was so revered at Alabama. He didn't invent weightlifting, but I mean, he was there and he was that lone voice for all those years for Nick. And as you just said, 10 and 13 years. That's it's what, after this next hire by Coach Pruitt, it will be. That's dating back to when Johnny Long was let go, when Phillip was let go in 2008. And the last time that Tennessee had a class come in and play all 4 years for the same strength guy was Johnny Long, 2005 to 2008. It's mind-boggling, almost as mind-boggling as when Tennessee had 6 straight years of a new defensive line coach.
Yeah, I mean, when you start talking about 10 and 13, that seems pretty crazy. But to me, when you put it in the perspective that no player has come through Tennessee's program as a 4-year player and worked under the same strength coach their entire career seems crazy to me. That just seems hard to fathom that Tennessee's just, had the wrong guy in there, or they, changing coaches, and then coaches went through a couple of those. It's really interesting the strength and coaching profession. I remember back years ago, nobody knew who John Stuckey was, and John Stuckey liked it that way. He didn't want anybody to know who he was. He didn't. He was behind the scenes. He was not visible in any way. He stood on the sideline. If he stood over there, he was very stoic. You know. Then you got a newer generation. You had Johnny Long, and there's nothing wrong with it. He was a towel waver, and then we moved forward to guys like Scott Cochran, who hold their fingers or hold their hands up for the entire quarter, and he's on the jumbotron, and he's the hype guy for the crowd at Alabama, and that profession has become highly paid because it's a very important job, but they've also become personalities, which is something that wasn't the case 7-10 years ago. It's really kind of interesting how that job has changed over the last 5 to 7 years, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, realistically, outside of, a few names, how many strength coaches do you realistically know? I think that they become personalities if they're at certain programs. I couldn't tell you who Clemson's strength coach is, and they've been a perennial, you know, top 5 team for several years now. So I think that you know, to me it just varies by each school. I'll say this: Craig Fitzgerald going to the NFL, he goes from a very hot name and hot commodity and somebody that his name had kind of grown and grown and grown. He'll go into the NFL and go back into you know you know where nobody will be talking about Craig Fitzgerald anymore. The NFL, you don't ever hear about people talking about the strength coach in the NFL because they have so many personal trainers for the players. A lot of the strength coaches in the NFL just do they just kind of maintain, in season work, but off season, it's vastly different for those guys.
All right, let's tackle the elephant in the room here. Obviously, with everything going on with the coronavirus and the fact that students are not on campus, not interacting with their strength coach, not expected to interact with their strength coach, face to face on campus for several weeks. In some ways, is this, if you're going to lose your strength coach, is this an okay time to lose them because they're not working with your team every day and not expected to until the summertime at the earliest?
Well, I'll say this: I think you could make a case either way. So it didn't really answer your question, but you could make a case for the fact that you know Jeremy, is going to hire a guy who is going to come in and be able to kind of get his feet underneath him a little bit before he has to work with specific kids. But you could also say that's kind of a detriment. you come in, you want to meet the team. You can't have any hands-on, contact with the team, um, for the next little bit. So that's going to make this a challenge as to kind of what Coach Pruitt does. Does he promote Brent, or does he look outside, much the way he did when he hired Craig Fitzgerald, who was someone that he had no dealings with before he got to Tennessee.
I think as you think about it and look at it, Austin, to me, it feels like promoting within is, I guess, maybe the easier play and somewhat the safer play because you're not changing the system in which these kids have been a part of. Because whenever you get your team back as a head coach, whatever date that's going to be in the coming weeks, months, you're going to have a short period and a short window to get your team ready to play and to get your team in some kind of shape. So, do you want to have, hey, let's learn how this guy does things, let's learn how his program works, or do you want to promote from within and stay within the framework of the program you've been working the last 3 years, particularly in the summertime, so that there's not, you don't lose a week to 10 days figuring out what this new strength coach wants is what they're used to with Craig Fitzgerald and his staff, because his staff is very hands-on with these guys. I mean, Coach Fitzgerald has made it very clear it's about his entire staff, not just him. He lets his staff do a lot of work. So there would be some type of continuity if you promoted within, right?
I agree with that. And I think Coach Pruitt's very comfortable with several guys on Coach Fitzgerald's staff, whether it be AJ Artis, whether it be Byron Jared. I don't want to butcher the last name, Jerido. Whether it be a guy like Mike Farrell, not Mike Farrell from Rivals, a different Mike Farrell. There's a couple of different candidates there to promote. Then there's a guy who's a former Vol, who is actually would be on Coach Fitzgerald's staff with the New York Giants. He's the assistant strength coach there. Thomas Stallworth, who was a linebacker back in the day for Tennessee. He was the head strength coach at Western Kentucky for 3 years. He was at Mississippi State. He's been with the Giants for the last several years as the assistant strength coach there. Would he have interest, or would Coach Pruitt take a swing at, we've heard that we've been down this road before because we've had so many of these strength hires. But Tommy Moffitt at LSU, there are several, different, names that, maybe he goes out there and swings at. Think about it. Nick just hired a guy in Indiana. Did you know about the strength coach in Indiana before Nick Saban hired him? No, I didn't. I mean, I don't think a lot of people do. So, would he go outside or would he just promote? I think at this time, I think he probably would look to at least give it a look and talk to Craig Fitzgerald potentially and say, hey, do you think any of these guys can handle the job?
Yeah, I think that's what you've got to see it because, again, the easier thing may be to promote to create some continuity, but it's got to be a guy who can handle the job. When Butch Jones made a change and got rid of Dave Lawson, who was I thought, a very important cog for him, and he promoted within, Mike Surson was not ready for the job. He couldn't handle the culture in the weight room. He got kind of ran over, if you will, with some of those guys. That's got to be a pretty stern guy. And you're right. You got to find out, can they handle the weight room and the responsibility of the weight room. So we'll see what happens there. But certainly big news. Not, we didn't think anything was going to really go on with the football program during this time. Players are off campus. Coaches can't recruit, all those things. But you always think, you never know. And so here's Jeremy Pruitt in the middle of everything else is going on with his program right now, trying to find a strength coach, has to go out and make the right hire, an important hire for this program to continue on the path that they've been on, that he's been very, very pleased with under Craig Fitzgerald. Big hire, Austin. Going to be interesting to see what direction he goes.
Yep, it's an interesting time just with the world and all that's going on with the virus, and now all of a sudden Jeremy Pruitt's thrust into a role of trying to hire someone, and maybe depending on whether you can actually have people on campus for interviews. Each job is different. Would that potentially alter how he kind of goes about it, and would that give the guys that are already in the building a leg up?
Certainly a good point. We'll have continuing coverage of this on the General's Quarters and on VolQuest.com throughout the remainder of today and in the coming days ahead. For Austin Price, I'm Brett Hubbs. Thanks for joining us.